Welcome to Psyched for Psychology, a Nystrom & Associates podcast. Our hosts, Michelle Iverson and Brett Cushing, are both licensed marriage and family therapists at Nystrom & Associates. Each week, they talk about all things mental health and therapy, and you get a chance to dive into specific psychology topics that help promote personal development and wellness. And now, here are your hosts, Michelle and Brett.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Psyched for Psychology. My name is Brett Cushing.
And I'm Michelle Iverson, and thank you so much for joining our podcast today. Episodes are being released every week on Tuesday mornings. Surprise, surprise. We've actually kept up with that and actually continued to release on that weekly schedule.
I'm kind of surprised.
I'm very proud of us. You can also email us at podcast@nystromcounseling.com. We always want to hear your feedback, your comments, and ideas for any episodes that you would love for us to talk about. So we are actually going to do a little bit of an interesting interview today. And the interview is with, drumroll,
That's exciting.
Our most amazing guest ever, Brett.
Wow. I don't know if we're setting the bar pretty low here, but yeah, I'm excited. I'm really glad to be able to talk about this because I have my ABD degree, which is I'm all but dissertated. And so I did work on my doctoral dissertation. I never finished it. But I'm going to share a little bit about what I spent a lot of time on.
Is this going to be part of the topic of the dissertation topic?
Well, yes. Yeah. And maybe someday I'll finish it. I don't know. But it emanated from my own personal journey, right? I've always said the best therapists are the ones that are continually doing therapy and working on themselves. And so this was really the byproduct of my own work. Mm-hmm. And so it's my opus, so to speak. And self-differentiation is the topic. And that sounds really cool. It's a great term to use and look really smart amongst other people. But what are we talking about? Mm-hmm. A couple examples maybe is when you see, I don't know, this is kind of funny for me, when I am someplace at McDonald's and somebody gets really angry, in the lobby, and they're really upset and they're yelling, and you can sort of feel all the anxiety everybody else around that person is feeling. Right. And they sort of take on the anxiety of the angry person and that conflict. And we see that, in those public settings, but we feel that as well in our relationships. And a lot of times within our family of origin or within our marriages. Mm-hmm. And there's a phrase I hear a lot today. You made me feel. Mm-hmm. And people take a lot of offense, especially I think because I think my feelings, if you've done something to me, Michelle, I believe because I have negative feelings, mm-hmm. you are responsible for my feelings. Right. And self-differentiation is the concept that there's an ending to you and a beginning to me, so that your behaviors are about you. My emotions are really about me, and I'm responsible for my emotions. And I can't blame you for them. I can't say, you make me so angry. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're talking about today. I just wanted to tee it up this way because I think people will understand it better, this whole concept, as we begin to delve into it a little bit more deeply.
So when we hear that word self-differentiation from Brett and that idea of boundaries, why do you think this topic, the need even for that boundary between people, why do you think that is so important?
It's a really good question. And I would say the answer is because when we have boundaries, we are able to preserve our own sense of identity. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, if I don't have a good boundary, a good sense of self independent of you. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, you're angry with me. Mm-hmm. And if you're really angry with me, I might feel I'm responsible for how you feel. I might be responsible for your anger. Mm-hmm. And now I'm really not responsible for that, but I might take it on like, oh no, Michelle's going to be mad. Mm-hmm. I need to kind of fix it. I need to manage this for her somehow. Now I'm really not being true to myself. Mm-hmm. I'm only trying to work on managing you and what's yours, your emotions. And so when I'm doing that, I'm losing myself for the sake of others. Mm-hmm. And so we're talking about boundaries, and boundaries preserve my identity. We're in a room right now we affectionately call our podcast room, and we have boundaries, right? And so we've got walls and we have windows and we've got a door, and they're all different kinds of boundaries, and they're used to preserve, to provide and protect the identity of this room.
The space.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happens when people get really stuck with this concept and with this idea?
Well, what happens is we tend to take responsibility for what's not ours. And I might take responsibility, as I'm saying, for what your thoughts are, what your emotions are. I might take responsibility for how you are going to react. When I am doing that, I'm not only losing my sense of self, I'm also living in a constant state of heightened anxiety too. Because think about that. I believe I'm responsible for how you feel. Like, I'm responsible if you feel upset with me. I'm responsible if you have a negative, intense reaction to me. And now notice, that's not my responsibility.
That's so far out of your control, too.
Thank you. That's just where I was going to go. And so how anxious is that to try to control something that is out of my control and out of my responsibility? So, I mean, think about that in a workplace. If you were held responsible for something you have no control over, that would be anxiety producing every day, going in and knowing that your boss is going to hold you accountable for something you have no control over.
Right.
And that's what we do in these relationships. We have this sense where I feel I'm responsible for other people's feelings, their reactions, etc. And because of that, I'm living in this anxiety, like, oh no, what am I going to do? And so I have to work harder and harder and harder. When people are doing this, and I used to do this a lot growing up, and I still have to work on it, but I would live with a certain mentality that I would get stuck in. And the mentality is the pressure is all on me. And for what? Well, the pressure is on me to make sure you are always okay. You're happy. You don't have a negative reaction to me. And so that's the mentality, so that the pressure is all on me, and then the subsequent anxiety. And then so we lose ourselves and we live in this constant state of anxiety.
Is there any particular things that happened? You mentioned that confusion that can occur. Is there anything that happens when we get confused about that boundary? In understanding what am I truly responsible for and what I'm not responsible for?
Great. Let's take a look at that. Let's first maybe identify what I am responsible for, what I'm not. And because there is a lot of confusion for that, even in our culture, because we like to say, you made me mad, or we believe I'm responsible for how somebody feels and reacts. I am responsible for two things. I'm responsible for how I treat myself, and I'm responsible for how I treat others. Now, people would say to me, Brett, are you taking care of yourself? Are you practicing good self-care? And I'm like, yeah, I take good care of myself. Sure. I eat a frozen pizza and drink a Mountain Dew and watch a movie every Friday for 2 hours. And I really didn't understand what that was, to take care of myself. Why? Because I was so attuned and hypervigilant of how other people were thinking and feeling. So
it's a big problem for some therapists.
It is, yes. And so I kind of remembered back when I was growing up, I had a bike. Okay, my parents swear they never bought me a yellow bike, but that was my first bike, and I'm gonna go to the mat on that one. And that was, they got me a yellow bike, and yellow bike's fine, it's okay, but I really wanted my friend Bob Schwalbach's red bike with a huffy, like big seats, and so I didn't take care of what was mine, my bike. But I remember so I would leave it, kind of like outside for the night, hoping, praying somebody would steal it or
something.
Mom,
I'm going to need a new bike.
Yeah, it's like, hey, look at me, I'm a victim, right? Somebody stole my bike. And I wanted to play that card because I wasn't being responsible for what was mine. And my dad would say to me, and rightly so, he would say, you need to put your bike in the garage. That is your bike. That is your responsibility. And I think about that. What is me? What is mine now? Well, it's my thoughts, my feelings, my actions, my opinions and desires. Those are mine, just like my bike was mine.
Right.
And I need to put it in a place like a garage with boundaries that can be locked and protected, because that's mine. And I need to really protect it because other people are constantly trying to steal my thoughts and make my thoughts their thoughts. And they do that by, well, this is the term we use a lot in therapy, is like they should on us, right? And so people should on us, which is a very shouldy thing to do, right? And so when that happens, that's when we start to lose ourselves because I haven't protected what's mine, my thoughts and my boundaries. Now, I need to have people have influence in that. So I might see you as a therapist. You're a great therapist. So I might come to you, Michelle.
I'd love to work with you, Brett.
That'd be great. I would love that too. And I might come to you and just be like, boy, I don't know what's me and what's mine, but I do want your input. So I'm going to allow some people to have input. And be able to come and go into my life. And other people, the people who kind of in a toxic way should on me, I'm going to have a much more rigid, thicker boundary.
Right. That idea of a more diffuse boundary or a more solid one.
Absolutely.
Depending on the relationship and depending, honestly, I think a lot of ways in whether people show that they will respect the boundaries that we have.
Yes. And now getting into your initial question from 10 minutes ago, what happens when we confuse this about what's mine and what's not mine is we become enmeshed. And so if people are listening, if you took your hands and your fingers and sort of had your palms towards you and your fingers towards each other, and you kind of bring your fingers together almost like you're praying, okay? And your fingers are kind of enfolded together, that's enmeshed. So like if your right hand has attached to it all the fingers, and the fingers represent, like that person's thoughts, their feelings, their reactions, their opinions, etc. And then you're the left hand, and you have on your fingers your thoughts, your feelings that are attached to you, your desires. When we are enmeshed with somebody, it's like when the hands are folded together. Now, notice there's a lot of closeness, but there's no uniqueness. It's just like one entity. So
where do I stop? Where do you begin?
Precisely. Yeah. It's really hard to tell. It's like one entity now. And so when the person, let's say the right hand is one person, they have a thought and they have a feeling with their fingers and they have a reaction, it affects you. Because like you said, it's all one person now. All sorts of closeness, no uniqueness. So that's what happens is we become enmeshed and we do lose our sense of identity. Then what happens, a guy named Murray Bowen talked about this years ago, and he talked about what happens is he called it an emotional cutoff, right? And so what happens is people reject this because this enmeshment can feel a little too anxious. Where am I? I've lost myself, and I don't even know what my thoughts and feelings and desires are because I defer to everybody else. So if you take your hands and unfold them and stretch your arms out apart from each other as far as you can, that's what we have is this emotional cutoff. People become so distant. Now, notice there's lots of uniqueness, but there's no closeness whatsoever. And then what people do is like, well, gosh, I feel so distant from this person. And so they want to get closer, but the only way they know how to be close is back to being enmeshed. And there is no sense of uniqueness anymore. And then they vacillate back and forth, kind of like an accordion going back and forth. And you can tell that's exhausting, and there's no clear understanding of how do I have closeness with somebody and maintain my uniqueness at the same time. And the goal is to find that balance of closeness and uniqueness without having that sense of anxiety.
So how do you think, especially for the people that vacillate, that go from the closeness to the distance? And it's actually, funny comment, like if you're watching Brett in the studio right now, when he does his distance, he does the Chris Lindahl pose on all of the real estate ads, which I heard he tried to trademark.
Is that right?
Yes.
I did not know that.
So, but that idea that some people will do that, they will vacillate between the closeness, between the distance. So you can imagine that, like when we talk about that distance, like Chris Lindahl pose is what we're talking about here. What leads to that imbalance of that struggle between the uniqueness and the closeness, and finding a balance that actually works for people?
Well, it's learned behavior. Okay. So we grow up in homes a lot of times where the boundaries aren't real clear. And there's usually like an anxious, we would call it as licensed marriage and family therapists, we call it an anxious system, that all the relationships are really one big system of operation. And so there's anxiety here. And the way we deal with the anxiety is, okay, I'm going to be really close, okay, or I'm going to get really distant. And so we're alleviate anxiety in the home. And so we learn this. And the term we use is homeostasis. Now, another great term. All these are great terms we get to throw out and look smart. Homeostasis is basically when you have like a car, you've seen in a movie where you have a car is careening off the edge of a cliff and nobody moves.
I love that trope.
Yeah, isn't that great? It's like everyone's kind of holding their breath and nobody's going to move.
I think about Jurassic Park. I can't remember which one, when the whole trailer is like off the cliff and like the glass is breaking and they can't move.
Yeah. And it's in so many movies, you know, and then like, I don't know which one it is, but this movie and nobody moves, and then the pelican like lands on the end of the vehicle and that careens them over the edge. And that's how our homes can be a lot of times. We're in homeostasis. It's not a state of peace, but it's a state of all right, nobody move and everybody play your role, because if you don't, we're going over the edge. And so we are in these homes and there's this desire to keep that homeostasis, do whatever it takes. And so we learn that, okay, if I keep my parent, my sibling, whoever it is, from reacting, we can stay from careening off the edge. So that's what I mean. It's learned. It's not real obvious. It's very subtle, but it's very real. And so then we end up playing these roles, and according to the rules of our family, and these rules and roles they're not written down for everybody to see, but
everybody knows.
Everybody knows
what you're supposed to be doing and what you're not supposed to be doing, and the roles that you're playing.
Right. And notice within those roles and in those rules is that sense of responsibility. This is what I'm responsible for. And then if I start off learning that I'm responsible for things I'm ultimately not responsible for, well, you can see this becomes a pattern. And I do this not only in my relationships growing up, I do it with all my relationships. I might do it at work. I might do it in my marriage someday. And so now we're living in this perpetual state of anxiety and we're losing ourselves. That's what's so tragic. So it really is a learned behavior that we don't even realize.
So how do you think we figure out what are effective rules and roles that we can live by? And how would we know what those are?
Right. Well, I think a lot of it, for those of us who, like me, just didn't, were more enmeshed growing up, it's real easy to always know what other people think and feel. I think it's one of the things that really enabled me to be a good therapist, because I can walk into any room and I can tell you how everybody feels. I know what they're feeling. I probably can anticipate what they're going to say. And so that's a great strength. I'm so attuned to other people. And it's a great strength, but there's two problems with it. One, if I'm believing I'm responsible for how that person thinks and feels, now it's a tremendous liability, because I'm going to have all sorts of anxiety. And the other problem with that is I don't know who I am anymore. Because all I know is I know how you feel, Michelle, and I know how this person in the room or that other person in the bar or wherever I know how everybody feels, but I don't know myself. I'm not attuned to that at all, because I've had to suppress that all my life. So I think that's what we need to do is become increasingly aware of that, that I'm doing this. So when I talk to clients, I put this little diagram on the board. I call it Crazy Town. And I say, I used to be the mayor of Crazy Town. Okay. And so I was living like on the other side of the street, so to speak, where I was being responsible for things I'm not responsible for. So I tell my clients, now I'm no longer the mayor of Crazy Town, but I go back to visit quite often. And I never realize I'm there. I'm kind of like, how did I get to Crazy Town? How did I get here? And the way it tends to happen is I tend to should on myself. So I'll give you an example. One of the best days of my life. My oldest son got married, and I got to officiate the wedding, and it was just the most glorious day. Yeah. And I was so happy, so fulfilled. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, I started to feel a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety. And I thought, what is happening? This is going to be the best weekend of my life. Yeah. And it's getting ruined. Well, what happened was everybody was coming in from out of state, mm-hmm. and all my family was there, and Laura's family, and I wanted to make sure everybody was happy. Mm-hmm. Is everybody situated in the right place? Are people close enough? Or is everyone going to be able to gather together? Oh, that's all I was consumed with.
You were trying to be the dad, the officiant, the wedding planner.
Exactly. Yeah, because that was my responsibility, Michelle. I had to make sure everybody was going to be happy. And I noticed as I did that, I was back in crazy town. Mm-hmm. And I started to should on myself, like I should make sure everybody's happy. Mm-hmm. And if I did that, everybody would have probably been miserable by my behavior. And chief among those would have been myself. Mm-hmm. So luckily, I caught that. And I realized I'm back in crazy town. How did I get here? And I know the answer is always I am shoulding on myself mm-hmm. to be responsible for things that are not my responsibility. Mm-hmm. And when I can realize that, then I can say, oh, it's really not my responsibility. That's up to them. Their own happiness is their responsibility. Mm-hmm. So what they do with their time, that's on them. And so when I know that, I'm free. That's like the word I use, and the clients I work with, that's the word they use too. It's almost mm-hmm. like everybody says that I work with on this, is I'm free. Mm-hmm. And so there's like crazy town and sobriety town, I call it, or freedom town. Mm-hmm. And that's when we know it's like, I don't have to be responsible anymore for how other people think or feel. I just need to be responsible for how I think and feel. Mm-hmm. And what's liberating is to be able to say, I don't care mm-hmm. how you feel. Yeah. Now, Michelle, I do care about how you feel. When I say I really don't care, is basically me saying, I'm not responsible for that.
I've talked with some people who have really struggled with self-differentiation, but also very much have an internal value in themselves of loving to, like, being very respectful of other people.
Yeah.
But sometimes we get enmeshed, and sometimes that idea of respecting other people ends up turning into, so then I take those feelings on myself. And sometimes we flip that on its head. We've talked about what if the more respectful thing was to respect leaving those feelings with that individual who should and can own them for themselves.
Yeah, that's good. I really like that. It's much more kind than how I put it with my clients. Okay. I say we're stealing.
Oh, we're stealing. That's another way to put it, though.
We're stealing what's not ours. Yeah. We're stealing. Those are that person's feelings mm-hmm. and emotions and desires and expectations. Yeah. I'm stealing what's from them, what's theirs, and making it mine. And
what's really cool about language and therapy, there's no right way of going about this. We can always figure out what language really kind of fits and resonates for that person. I've absolutely got some clients who would resonate with the whole, oh, I'm being more respectful this way. And I've absolutely got some people who would be like, it would resonate more with me, that idea of not stealing from them.
Right. Yeah. I think we do need to know our clients and what's going to work to motivate them. Kind of like a coach, what's going to best motivate my player based on their personality. Absolutely. Or leaving people that ride a horse and then they won't go to work the next day and they're really sick. And so everybody jumps into their roles. Mm-hmm. And one person might say, well, it's okay. I'm going to call in to work for you and let them know you're sick. Mm-hmm. And then maybe the kids are going to help dad get to bed or something like that. And so everybody plays their roles and is responsible ultimately for the person who's the alcoholic. Now notice everybody's over functioning. Mm-hmm. They're not responsible for that. Mm-hmm. And yet that allows the alcoholic to never have to be responsible for their actions. And so it's helpful, I think, for people that are so attuned to how other people feel to realize that I'm really perpetuating this pattern that is really unhealthy. Mm-hmm. And I'm not helping. I think I'm helping this other person. I'm really being very detrimental to this person's own growth. And then what also happens is we tend to build up resentment towards people as well. We tend to have this expectation that someday they will start to take responsibility. But you know what? Why would they if I'm doing it for them all?
So how do we break that over-functioning pattern if that's occurring for us?
Great question. Well, I think when we start to do this, we need to become aware of what's going on. Again, as I said earlier, what's going on is I'm living in this area that I'm not responsible for, but I'm so attuned to that. It'd be kind of like going to my home, and I know everything. Or I can walk around my home blindfolded, and I'd be fine because I know where everything is. I'm so accustomed and so attuned to that. Put me in another home, a foreign home, and I wouldn't know how to function. And so that's kind of what happens when we've been living in this non-self-differentiated or enmeshed way. The difficulty is that home that seems foreign, that's really my home. That's my residence that I'm so unaware of. So we need to have increased awareness. And the way we have that is, first of all, we call it somatic awareness. And what do we mean by that? We're talking here about becoming aware of our physical sensations. What's happening in my body? My body is giving me all sorts of cues, kind of like your car has that dashboard with all the gauges, and it'll let you know how you're doing with gas and heat, and how your speed is. That's one I need to pay more attention to. And we have that going on in our body, and our body is just giving us, hey, warnings, like alerts. They're messages. So I might feel in my neck and my shoulders getting tense. Might feel like my breathing is getting short, and it's more rapid. For a lot of us, it's our gut. Our gut becomes unsettled considerably. Some people, their throat gets tight. And these are just some examples of that somatic awareness. And we need to pay attention to that. What's so sad is it's hard for us.
Right.
Because I know how everybody else feels. I just don't know how I feel. And if I've been doing this long enough, Michelle, all these sensations, well, that's normal. So I don't realize I'm having shallow breathing because that's just breathing. So I think with the help in therapy is to work through somatic awareness. Like that is your body telling you you're feeling anxiety. You're in this fight or flight mode. And so as we become somatically aware, then we also want to become cognitively aware of the shoulds. I talked about how when I should on myself, that is a fast track for me to go right back to crazy town, where I'm just like feeling responsible for everybody and everything. And so I need to be aware of how I am using shoulds unfairly upon myself to take responsibility for things that aren't mine. So I gave the example with my son's wedding. I realized I had that somatic awareness. I'm feeling anxious. My body is telling me, hey, be careful. And so I'm like, oh no, I must be anxious. And then I realized, where does my emotion come from? Well, it's coming from my thoughts. What are my thoughts? And I know you've talked before in other podcasts, these are our cognitive distortions. And my cognitive distortion is, I'm responsible for everyone having a good time this weekend. When I became aware of that through somatic awareness and then backing that up to my cognitive awareness, wow, okay. All right, now I know what's going on. And then my body is trying to be in the driver's seat saying, this is what's going on. You need to react. You need to do this. When I have this awareness, then I can say to my body, it's okay. Everything's cool. We can relax. Don't worry. Take the alarms, turn them off, turn it down. And then we do behavioral adjustment. We kind of like in the example I gave with my son's wedding, we remember, what am I responsible for and what am I not responsible for? We remember that, and then we reassert ourselves. We name our emotions. We name our thoughts. We name what our wishes are. So in the example with my son's wedding, I just said, hey, this is a big event for me, unapologetically. I think a lot of times when we are struggling with this enmeshment and we don't have good self-differentiation, we'll notice that we're apologizing all the time. Yes. And we're not used to asserting ourselves, because to do self-care, we believe it feels like I'm being selfish. So we want to do that, name these emotions and thoughts and wishes, become aware of it, don't apologize for it, and be truthful to others and ourselves.
Great. When I think about our biggest takeaways, for one, Brett's got to do the rest of his dissertation. We all have to encourage Brett.
Takeaway.
I know. We're going to encourage him too, because this topic is fascinating. It is incredibly relevant to so many people.
Right. I think it is. I think it's relevant. Think about your work environment. You know, when we're so worried about what our boss thinks, how our boss is going to react, right? Or we go to those family functions and we're so worried about what other people are thinking. We just find ourselves so quick to fall into that. And I do hear this all too often. So maybe one takeaway, if nothing else, people can respond when they hear somebody say, "You made me feel this way." They can say, "Well, at least to themselves, I'm not responsible for that."
Yeah. Wonderful.
So hopefully you have some good takeaways from today. And it's a topic that is worth more exploration and study for people and writing in my case. But I hope it is something that people will at least begin to pursue and realize the freedom that comes from being self-differentiated, that, you know what, this person, I can have a sense of uniqueness and closeness to them without having anxiety as well. So with that, we want to say thank you again for joining us today. And please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our Psych for Psychology podcast. We will have new episodes being released every Tuesday morning, and you can find us on any major podcast streaming platform. You can follow us for our new episodes.
And as usual, feel free to email us at podcast@nystromcounseling.com. You can also learn more about Nystrom & Associates and all of our available mental health services by going to nystromcounseling.com. Thank you so much for joining. We're psyched to talk to you again soon.
Thank you as always for listening, and please be sure to leave us a review. While this podcast can't be a replacement for therapy, we hope you enjoyed our discussion today and join us again next time. Nystrom & Associates is always available to those who are struggling. If you find yourself in need of support and help, please check us out at nystromcounseling.com.